7 words. That is all it took. The only thing they understand is bombs. 7 words, allegedly spoken behind closed doors inside the White House, and suddenly every diplomat, every oil trader, every intelligence analyst from Tokyo to Berlin stopped what they were doing and asked the same question. Is this real or is this a bluff? I need you to understand something before we go any further. What is happening right now, today, April 29th, 2026, is not a standard geopolitical standoff. What we are watching in real time is the slow motion collapse of American deterrence credibility in the most strategically vital waterway on the planet. And here is what nobody in mainstream media is telling you. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now. Because in the next 20 minutes, I am going to show you exactly how deep this goes and why the next 72 hours may change everything. Let me give you the map. Because if you do not understand the sequence of events that brought us here, nothing else I am about to tell you will make sense. Go back to February 2026. The United States launches what officials would later describe as a limited targeted campaign against Iranian military infrastructure, 12 days. That is how long the active bombardment phase lasts, 12 days. And then a ceasefire is announced. The administration calls it a success. Markets briefly stabilize. The world exhales. But here is what actually happened. The ceasefire did not end the conflict. It froze it. And while it was frozen, the United States quietly expanded its naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's crude oil supply moves every single day. Not 20% of American oil, 20% of the entire planet's oil. Now, fast forward to this week. April 27th, 2026. Trump cancels scheduled talks in Islamabad. Iran responds within minutes, putting a new proposal on paper. Secretary of State Rubio goes on Fox News and calls the situation in Hormuz unacceptable. And then the leak drops. 7 words that reframe everything. Here is why the stakes are different this time. This is not Iraq. There are no American soldiers dying on television. There are no flag-draped coffins coming home to dominate the news cycle. What there is right now is $4 gas creeping towards $6 in California, a Japanese prime minister quietly managing a domestic energy panic, and key American allies, Germany, Japan, South Korea, beginning to negotiate directly with Tehran because they simply cannot wait for Washington to figure this out. The COC is set, and what happens next depends entirely on whether anyone in this equation is actually willing to blink. Now let us slow this down, because this is where most analysts get it wrong. They read the headline, they react to the surface, and they miss what is actually being communicated. The only thing they understand is bombs. That is the quote. Attributed to President Trump, speaking to advisors, reported by Axios on April 28th, 2026. 7 words. But I want you to think about 3 things that nobody is asking out loud. First, who leaked this and why? This did not come from an Iranian state media outlet trying to provoke a reaction. This did not come from a hostile foreign intelligence service. This came from inside the administration, routed through Axios, one of the most deliberately sourced outlets in Washington. In intelligence analysis, there is a principle that is almost never discussed in public. You do not just read the information, you read who wants you to read it and why they want you to read it right now. So ask yourself, who benefits from the world believing that Donald Trump is in a bombs-only mindset at this exact moment? Is it the diplomatic wing trying to create negotiating pressure? Is it the hawkish faction inside the administration trying to lock the president into an escalatory posture before any deal can be reached? Both of those explanations are plausible. And the fact that both are plausible simultaneously should tell you something important about how chaotic the internal decision-making environment actually is right now. Second, look at who Trump was on the phone with when this sentiment was expressed. Mark Thiessen, Jack Keane, Lindsey Graham. I need you to understand who these 3 men are in the architecture of American foreign policy. Thiessen was a speechwriter for George W. Bush, the administration that gave us the Iraq War. Jack Keane is a retired 4-star general who is perhaps the single most recognizable face of the Iraq surge strategy, a man who has not encountered a military escalation option he did not find worth serious consideration. And Lindsey Graham, a senator who, and this is not a coincidence, happens to be the primary co-sponsor of legislation that would deliver significant financial benefits directly tied to Trump's personal interests. When a president is making consequential foreign policy judgments while simultaneously speaking with those three voices in his ear, that is not a deliberative process. That is an echo chamber with institutional credibility attached to it. Third, and this is the part that should genuinely concern you, look at the historical pattern of this specific type of language. In 1986, Ronald Reagan called Muammar Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East and launched airstrikes on Tripoli. In 2002, George W. Bush used language about Saddam Hussein that was almost clinical in its certainty: weapons of mass destruction, mushroom clouds, a smoking gun. In both cases, the rhetoric preceded action. In both cases, the language was designed not just to communicate resolve, but to narrow the available options, to make inaction feel like weakness. Do you see what is happening here? The only thing they understand is bombs is not an assessment. It is not an intelligence conclusion. It is a rhetorical frame. And once that frame is established publicly, walking it back without losing face becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is what foreign policy scholars call a commitment trap. And right now, based on everything we can see from open sources, the United States may be walking directly into one. The deterrence gap is not just about military capability. It is about credibility. And credibility, once spent, does not come back cheaply. Now, I want you to pull back with me, way back. Because what we have been discussing is not just about one leaked quote, one canceled meeting, or even one war. What we are watching is a fundamental restructuring of global power, and the Strait of Hormuz is the exact point where that restructuring is becoming visible to anyone willing to look. Let me give you the numbers first, because the numbers do not lie. As of this week, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has hit the single lowest level ever recorded, not the lowest in recent memory, the lowest in recorded history. One liquefied natural gas tanker made it through in a recent 24-hour period. The normal flow is hundreds of vessels. Brent crude oil has already climbed back to exactly where it was before the ceasefire, meaning the ceasefire delivered zero lasting economic relief. California drivers are currently paying $5.92 per gallon, and based on the trajectory of Brent crude moving 2 to 3% upward every single day, $6 is not a prediction. It is an arithmetic conclusion that is days away. Now zoom out further. Japan, a country that imports nearly 90% of its energy needs, the vast majority of which historically transited the Strait of Hormuz. Last week, Japanese television ran a segment celebrating the arrival of a single American oil tanker. They treated it like a national event. That one tanker contained enough oil to supply Japan for approximately half of one day of national consumption. Half of one day. The Japanese Prime Minister is currently under domestic political fire because she is refusing to publicly tell her population to begin mandatory energy rationing. She is trying to manage the panic. But the strategic petroleum reserve that Japan has been drawing down, nearly 200 days worth of reserves because they planned for exactly this kind of scenario, that reserve is finite. And the math does not work indefinitely. South Korea is in a nearly identical position. Germany's chancellor has publicly described the situation in terms that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of this conflict, calling it a humiliation, saying there is no exit in sight. But here is what I need you to pay very close attention to, because this is the detail that changes everything. A super yacht linked to a sanctioned Russian billionaire sailed through the Strait of Hormuz on April 26, 2026, one of the very few vessels to transit the blockaded shipping lane during the entire conflict. And now there are credible reports that a Japanese tanker has secured transit rights through the strait, not because the blockade was lifted, not because a deal was reached between Washington and Tehran, but because Japan, a treaty ally of the United States, went directly to Iran, agreed to Iran's terms, and paid what amounts to a toll denominated in either cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan, not dollars. Do you understand what that means? It means the petrodollar system, The architecture that has underwritten American global financial dominance since 1974 is being quietly renegotiated in real time, not at a summit, not through a treaty, but one tanker at a time in a narrow stretch of water 21 miles wide. This is not just about oil prices. This is about who writes the rules of global commerce for the next 50 years. And right now, based on everything we can observe from open sources, Iran is holding the pen. Now we get to the part that almost nobody in Western media is covering with the depth it deserves. Because while Washington is debating rhetoric and Tehran is making public statements about international law and piracy, there is something happening inside Iran's power structure that may be the single most important variable in this entire equation. And it is something that neither side wants to talk about openly. Here is what we know, or more precisely, what we can reasonably piece together from open sources. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the late Ali Khamenei, has not been seen publicly in any meaningful capacity since assuming his position. He has not spoken on state television. His voice has not been broadcast. His physical presence has not been confirmed in any verifiable public setting. Secretary of State Rubio himself acknowledged this directly, describing a supreme leader whose credibility is, in his words, still untested and whose access is questionable. Now, I want you to think about what that actually means in operational terms. If the supreme leader is not visibly, actively, and credibly in command, then who is issuing directives? According to multiple independent reports that have emerged over the past several weeks, the answer may be Iran's senior military commanders, generals who are, by institutional disposition and professional experience, significantly less inclined toward diplomatic compromise than a political leadership trying to consolidate power would be. And here is where it gets genuinely complicated. The Financial Times, reporting from Tehran as recently as this week, describes an internal factional war that has broken out into the open inside Iran's political elite. The hardline Paydari faction is now publicly attacking the parliamentary speaker who led recent talks with American officials. One hardline politician told local media, and I'm going to paraphrase carefully here because the framing matters, that negotiations at this stage represent pure damage and that no Iranian official should be pursuing them. Another told state television that officials are obligated to thoroughly follow the supreme leader's guidelines, implying that those who negotiated may have acted outside their authority. Stop. I need you to sit with that for a moment. You cannot negotiate a sustainable ceasefire with a government that is simultaneously fighting a civil war over whether negotiating is itself an act of betrayal. The Americans need a counterpart with genuine decision-making authority. And based on everything we can observe right now, and I want to be precise, this is analytical inference from open sources, not confirmed intelligence. That counterpart may not currently exist in any coherent, unified form inside Tehran. This is not a negotiating posture. This is structural paralysis at the worst possible moment. And it is a variable that Washington's current strategy appears to be dangerously underestimating. Now, let us talk about how Iran sees this, because one of the most dangerous mistakes you can make in geopolitical analysis is to only ever look at the board from your own side. According to reporting from Jeremy Scahill at Dropsite News, and this is serious, deeply sourced journalism, not speculation, Iranian strategic thinking right now is organized around what they internally describe as 3 M's: munitions, markets, and midterms. And I want to walk you through each one carefully, because understanding this framework is the only way to understand why Iran is not behaving like a country that believes it is losing. Munitions first. Iran's military planners believe, and again, this is their assessment as reported through open sources, not a verified intelligence conclusion, that the United States has expended a significant and not easily replaceable portion of its precision munitions stockpile during the campaign that began in February 2026. This is not a secret. The general parameters of American munitions consumption rates are visible in open source defense analysis. If their calculation is even partially correct, it changes the escalation calculus dramatically, because threatening military action you cannot fully sustain is not deterrence. It is a bluff with an expiration date. Markets second. Iran is deliberately targeting the economic pressure points that feed directly into American domestic politics. Every dollar that Brent crude climbs, every cent that gas prices rise at the pump, every supplemental budget debate in Tokyo and Seoul, these are not collateral effects from Iran's perspective. They are the strategy. However, and this is the critical counter-argument that the Iranian calculus may be underweighting, the American stock market is not collapsing. The S&P 500 remains historically elevated. Technology companies just reported their strongest month since 2002. Wall Street and Main Street are currently living in two completely different economic realities, which means the political pain threshold for the administration may be significantly higher than Tehran is assuming. Midterms third, and this is the long game, November 2026. Iran's strategic bet, as best as analysts can reconstruct it from public statements and observable behavior, is that every additional week of economic pressure, every additional news cycle dominated by rising gas prices and diplomatic failure, chips away at Republican political capital ahead of the midterm elections. The longer this drags on without a credible American victory narrative, the more damage accumulates. But here is the counter-argument that Iran's strategists need to grapple with seriously. The American public has demonstrated, repeatedly and historically, a remarkable capacity to normalize prolonged conflict when there are no American casualties visible on television. Iraq ran for years as a background story. Afghanistan consumed 2 decades. $4 gas is genuinely painful, but it is not the kind of visceral, immediate shock that forces rapid political change. The Iranian 3M strategy is sophisticated. It is not infallible. And the most dangerous outcome of all is if both sides simultaneously overestimate their own leverage and underestimate the other's tolerance for pain. Because that is precisely the combination that produces wars nobody actually wanted, that simply could not find a way to stop. We have arrived at the part that kept me up last night. Because everything I have walked you through, the leaked quote, the power vacuum in Tehran, the allies paying tolls in cryptocurrency, the 3M strategy, the munitions calculus, all of it converges on a single concept that I believe is the most underreported strategic reality of this entire conflict, the deterrence gap. Let me define this precisely, because the term gets used loosely, and that looseness obscures how genuinely dangerous the phenomenon is. Deterrence works on one condition and one condition only. The other side must believe that you will follow through, not hope you will, not suspect you might. Believe with a high degree of certainty that the consequences you have threatened are real, imminent, and unavoidable. The moment that belief erodes, even partially, you do not have deterrence anymore. You have theater. And theater in a military standoff is significantly more dangerous than either genuine peace or open conflict because it creates the conditions for catastrophic miscalculation. Now ask yourself honestly, after everything we have covered today, does Iran believe the United States will follow through? They watched the 12-day campaign begin and then stop. They watched a ceasefire get announced while the blockade quietly expanded. They watched the Islamabad talks get canceled and then watched a new Iranian proposal get rejected within hours. They watched American allies begin paying their tolls directly to Tehran. And they have heard, through a leak that originated inside the American government itself, that the president's private assessment is that they only understand bombs, an assessment that has so far produced no additional bombs. I want to give you 3 scenarios. And I want to be absolutely clear. These are analytical frameworks based on observable open source information, not predictions, not confirmed intelligence assessments. Scenario 1, a negotiated breakthrough. Possible, but requires both sides to simultaneously climb down from public positions that have been stated in the most unambiguous terms. The internal political cost of that climb down on both sides is extraordinarily high right now. Scenario 2, extended frozen conflict. The most historically familiar outcome. Both sides maintain current postures, the blockade continues, gas prices stabilize at a painful but tolerable level for American consumers, and this becomes the new normal. An Iraqification of the Persian Gulf, bleeding resources and credibility across years rather than weeks. Scenario 3, uncontrolled escalation. Iran's oil storage reaches capacity. They are forced to shut production infrastructure. They interpret that shutdown as an act of war, which under every recognized framework of international conflict, the blockade already legally constitutes. They strike regional oil infrastructure, and suddenly we are in territory that no current strategic model has fully mapped. Here is the detail that crystallizes all three scenarios into one image: a Japanese tanker paying a toll in Chinese yuan to pass through waters that American naval vessels are simultaneously blockading. That is not a geopolitical abstraction. That is the deterrence gap made visible. That is the moment you know the map has already changed. Not when the bombs fall, but when your closest allies start paying your adversary for permission to exist in a space you claim to control. So let us bring this home. 3 dangers. Right now. Today, April 29th, 2026. First, the deterrence gap is widening in real time. Every day that passes without a credible, visible consequence, the 7 words lose another fraction of their weight. Second, America's closest allies are actively restructuring their energy relationships around American failure in this conflict. That process, once started, does not reverse easily. Third, there is no visible exit strategy. And historically, when great powers enter conflicts without exit strategies, they do not find elegant solutions. They find Afghanistan, they find Iraq, they find decades. And the question I want to leave you with is this. The real issue is not whether Iran understands bombs. The real question is whether the United States currently has the strategic coherence, the domestic political will, and the alliance credibility to make that argument mean something, before the window to make it closes permanently. I do not have a clean answer for you. Nobody does right now. What I do know is that the next 72 hours will tell us more than the last 72 days. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because when this moves, and it will move, you will not want to be the last person in the room to understand what just happened. I will see you the moment it does.